All right, we're back again with the Pat Stedman podcast interview series, and we have today Noah J. Revoy. Noah, I've been following your stuff on Twitter for the last, I guess, 2 years, I would say. Um, Really incredible material. You really emanate that masculine patriarch energy, and I know you talk a lot about relationships and about dealing with, your relationship with yourself and your relationship with women. And you also talk about manipulation, and we're going to get into all that stuff here today. But one of the things I just wanted to start this off with is first just to get an idea of, so how did you get into this space? I always find it so interesting, people's journeys into the manosphere, the broader self-improvement community. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so when I was younger, basically I've always been a coach. I just didn't realize it. At a certain point, I realized that was what I should do for a living. And when I was younger, I was being cultured to become a minister. So I had training from about 2 years old onward in public speaking and in teaching people, and really a lot of appeals to the heart, because it's a minister, it's religion, there's a lot of emotional appeal there, and how to connect with people and how to help them build a relationship with God and with the church as well. And that led me to a life of desiring to help people. It is part of my nature, but it was cultivated into me as well. And so I was just helping people with their relationships, with their marriages, with their anxiety, and which is their relationship with the future, basically. And at a certain point, excuse me, I realized that this was the thing that I was doing and wanted to do all the time. So I stopped doing business consulting mostly. I still work with companies, but I work with them about the relationship they have with their employees and their distributors, instead of working on the basis of, help you make more money.
Mm-hmm.
That's the end result. So I started to just do the thing I was. I had to be that. And when I started to coach people, I started to get noticed after a while. And I think it was actually Anthony Johnson inviting me to a 21 convention summit in Poland. Yeah, we were in Poland, and that was really the beginning of getting into the manosphere. Before that, I was kind of doing my own thing in my own space, kind of adjacent actually to Stefan Molyneux, because there was a lot of people that had been on his show, and then afterwards they needed follow up, and Stefan doesn't do that, so I was doing a lot of that follow up for people. And that helped me to get a lot of my early clients as well.
Anthony's a great talent scout. He sees guys who maybe aren't like trying to break into the manosphere. They're just doing high quality stuff in their own sort of world. And he's like, hey, let's elevate you, put you in the platform. So you said that you were being trained initially for a pastor. So what kind of faith in particular were you? What kind of Christianity? I assume is Christianity. What kind of?
Yeah, so I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and so I haven't really talked about that much publicly. And I was raised that way, and it was around the time I started becoming a coach that I stopped being a Jehovah's Witness. So I stopped being associated with that organization, and for various reasons. I don't really want to get into that too deeply here, but what I realized is that I actually was helping people. Even as a minister, I was helping people mostly with relationships. And most of the help I was doing wasn't specifically from the Bible. A lot of it was the things that, the Bible says, love your wife. What does love mean? I have no idea. I've never been loved before. What's love like? And people would say these type of things. And I realized that a lot of that advice is for people who are already healthy. If you're already healthy, do this. If you're not healthy, you need to start at a deeper foundation. And so the whole time that I was a minister, I was studying, psychology, relationship books. I got a stack of them here that I got to read that are more recent ones. And a lot of it was, I wanted to get away from the relationship books, because most of them that existed when I was younger were written by boomers, for boomers. And they didn't appeal to old, they didn't work with people my age. And so I went right down to fundamentals of psychology. And now I'm actually looking at neuroscience instead of even psychology, because we're getting into measurable science versus I think this works, or this is what I've experienced working. So we're going one step beyond and seeing how human brains work. And it actually is startlingly simple, the way that the human mind works. very similar to how a computer works, where we have an operating system. So that's our fundamental view of how the world works. And then we have programs that we run there. And if we're not getting the results we want, we're running the wrong program. Or, a lot of people are running just too many programs. They got too much going on in their life, so nothing is going forward. Because it's like those, you ever see, usually it's older ladies, and they say, my computer's slow, can you help me? And you open it up and there's 500 windows open.
Yeah.
And they've got, all these add-ons installed to their system that are slowing it down. A lot of people's mind is like that. There's just too much going on. Most of it's unimportant. And so treating the human mind in that way allows us to be much more flexible, and we can change the programs people are running. We change the results they get in their life.
So I'm curious, like, what kind of, you mentioned how books a long time ago, for the boomers, that they had a different kind of purpose based on the generational, I guess, situation. Go into that a bit more. What do you think has made those books antiquated, or even were they never really that beneficial?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. This is Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. So when I read it, it's like, oh yeah, my grandparents' generation and maybe some in my parents' generation, so there's an overlap in the boomers there. They acted like that. But it talks about how, it says women want respect and men want acceptance. Like, no, not in 2022.
Yeah.
In 2022, women want to be accepted for everything that they do in general, and men want to be respected by women. How did that flip occur? Well, I actually think that that's a more natural way for things to be. I think the boomers had their, we blame them for things, but they also had their own scars, their own damage, because they were the first generation to be raised by television and public schools versus being raised by their parents. And the damage that they had resulted in a particular set of relationship problems. And these books identify and deal with those relationship problems, and they're probably useful for that generation. And we're starting to, actually, I think we're starting to come back to a very raw way of having relationships, but it's much closer to the reality that's not so distorted by what the boomers went through. I think it's always been that men wanted respect and women wanted acceptance. And for that to be flipped during the boomer age meant something happened to them which flipped that demand.
Well, they were going through that counterculture movement. Yeah. And so I think the big issue with the boomers, and you can track this across anything, like you can track it across economics, is that they didn't understand the foundations that they had in place. So they were like, what we've got right now, it isn't great. So we're going to dismantle some of it, or we're going to not maintain some of it, because they started to just think that stuff was automatically there and you could play on top of it and improve things. And the result is that foundation has gotten really rocky. And so when we get to this point, now we're having to go, as you say, back to first principles, because we're like, okay, there's no point even talking about this kind of stuff that the boomers prioritized in the 60s, because they maybe had the ability to experiment a little bit in that direction. Whereas now, without the foundation of male-female polarity, and it's just not, there's nothing to build off of.
Like, yeah, well, it's kind of like a man that notices that he's got some holes in the drywall, and he says, I'm gonna renovate the house. First thing he does is tear all the walls down. The roof collapses on him.
Yeah.
And basically, our generation is looking at that and going, your roof fell on you. You've got 3 divorces under your belt. No, I'm not going to do anything you did. I'm just going to start right from beginning. I'm not even going to use new materials to build. And that is that's a Herculean effort to rebuild relationships and an entire sexual marketplace from scratch. And it's painful, and we're going through the damage of it. The younger I see the people right now, the closer I see them being to some sort of a proper equilibrium. If I talk to your average other people might get different results, but I talked to, maybe they're not average, the ones contacting me, but like 18 to 20-year-old girls, most of the ones I talk to are virgins and want to stay and want to get married young.
Yeah.
That wasn't true when I was a kid. And I don't think it was true 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that building process is really in the infancy stage. I think the work that you and I and others are doing is helping it to go along.
Well, I've said this before, and I really, black pillars annoy me because I don't think that they have like a proper perspective on history and on energy movement. I mean, the pendulum swings.
Yeah.
And so people get frustrated that the regimes, so to speak, haven't changed and maybe they're worse than ever, but they're not tapping into sentiment. The ideas of the regime have already lost. I mean, I actually think that we hit rock bottom. People think that it's getting worse, and you can say that maybe on a surface level, but from a conversion standpoint, I think that we hit rock bottom, you know, maybe 2 years ago, like a year or two ago. Like the movement has changed quite a bit, and you're rightly seeing this counterculture developing among the Zoomers, right, Gen Z, and obviously you have a split within the generation because you have people who are totally sucked in completely to the propaganda, but the flip side is that, and I think this is something that another kind of mistake of people not really gauging history is that young people change their views very rapidly. So even if you have some true believers, but they're like 16, 18, 20, that doesn't really mean that much in the sense that, you know, assuming they don't undergo some sort of life-altering surgery, they're going to, a lot of these people are going to flip as the zeitgeist flips. I just, you know, I can.
Oh yeah.
I mean, people have to look at what they were like when they were younger. I mean, when I was that age, like when I was in my teens, I was like all about the Iraq War. I mean, I voted for Obama, although, you know, not that the alternatives were any better. But the point is, like, we do evolve, and I don't think that you can start to really write people off until maybe they get to their 30s with their ideas.
We also have to we forget often that each generation's exposed to different things. And, you know, between the 2020 election, the COVID response, and now the attempts to shut down all food production, the majority of people are starting to say, I don't believe anything that I see on a screen.
Yeah.
If I didn't see it with my own 2 eyes, or a friend that I trust with my life saw it and told me about it, it didn't happen. Or even if it did happen, they're using it as a manipulation against me. And I think that's the right frame to have. A lot of people are, you know, which news should I believe? Don't believe any of them.
Yeah.
Easy. Don't believe any of them. Even if they're telling you the truth, they're putting a manipulative spin on it. And the easy way to do that is just stop letting them poison you. It's not going to change how you raise your kids and what you know, where you go to work and what you do tomorrow. Ignore it. Keep it out of your head.
Yeah, I mean, the younger generation there's naivety among some of them, but there's also a growing information immune response that they just know how much they didn't grow up in high trust society where you actually had records of institutional trust, and so they're moving away from it much quicker, whereas the boomers are still like, well, I remember Watergate and how I could trust the media. It's like, well, that shit is way gone, you know, assuming even Watergate was like legitimate, but that's a whole separate thing. One point you mentioned here just now about raising kids, I mean, this is something I want to really touch on just for a moment, because there's a lot of people who feel like you can't raise kids in this environment because you're under attack from all sides. Even conservatives, their kids get taken in by the system. So in your perspective, how do you, I mean, I know that you believe in having children, but so I'm not gonna do you believe in having children in this environment, but how do you combat it? How do you deal with it?
Well, the same people that say your wife's going to leave you for Tyrone, and you're going to be paying half your wage to her in alimony because women are garbage, also tell you that you have no influence over your kids.
Right.
It's because it's the same. Those men don't.
Yeah.
Those men have no influence over their spouse or their children because they're barely men. We had an ice age about 10,000 years ago. It ended. And for more than 1,000 years, it was so cold that the human population got down to around 50,000 individuals, maximum. Might have been a little smaller. And I don't mean like in one big group. That was spread in a bunch of isolated groups. We survived that. We're never probably, if we face something that bad again, we're all dead. Mm-hmm. And we're not even a tenth of the way there or 1% of the way there right now. What we're facing right now is history's greatest IQ test. Mm-hmm. And the question is are you going to voluntarily surrender? Are you going to lose, voluntarily surrender, or are you going to win?
Yep.
And the only way to win is to have kids.
Yep. And
if you're worried about a kid or two of yours being captured, have 10 of them. So you have 8 or 9 that are okay. That's the solution. And I actually think the more kids you have, the less likely you are to have kids that get caught up in weird self-destructive ideas because they have their brothers and sisters for influence. They don't need to go make friends with weird people's children.
I agree with that 100%. And I just add this also. A lot of people are still, even if they see what's going on, they don't like it. They're still very much in this lazy, normie mindset where they're like, well, why can't I just check some boxes and everything's going to be okay? And so you have these conservatives who are going to, teach their kids conservative values, okay, whatever, but they teach it in a rigid way and they don't explain it. And most importantly, they don't understand the opposition. And so they just dismiss it. They say, that's bad. You shouldn't do that. And I think, children are not as stupid as I think a lot of, talking to kids in baby talk and stuff like that. They're not stupid. They pay attention. And if you tell a child something, but you have to explain it to them and say, this is why we do this and this is why they do that. And you help them to understand, you help educate them about counter propaganda. I actually think that you have and I haven't personally tested this out because my children are negative 3 months old and a year and a half at the moment. But there's if they understand what they're facing, it's hard for it to corrupt them in the same way.
Yes. Well, I live in the Iberian Peninsula. So if you don't know, that's for people that don't know, that's Portugal and Spain together is the Iberian Peninsula. It took 700 years to retake the Iberian Peninsula after the Moorish invasions. And that's 35 generations. Mm-hmm. And it was an intergenerational thing. Your bedtime stories prepared you for war. If you were a woman, your job was to produce more warriors. If you're a man, it was to produce wealth so that it could be invested in fighting to take back your, distant cousin's city so that he was free from Islamic control in his area. They were freeing their family all the way down. 35 generations of this. This requires an entire culture aligned with war. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not in a physical war at the moment, but if we want to win this thing, we have to say, I've talked to a lot of people. They're like, if this isn't resolved by the next election, I'm giving up. And it's like, that's dumb thinking. Are we ready to win this thing over the next 1,000 years? If we're not going to win because the enemy thinks in periods of 1,000 years. If we're thinking of periods of like less than 1,000 days, we can't compete with them. Our vision is too short. And we're not creating then a culture that's willing to deal with these things. My son saw something. His school is pretty based. I won't talk too much about it. I don't want to out his school, but they're pretty based. But he was watching something that was like pre-made that the school put out there. Okay, and it had some things in there talking about culture that were propaganda-ish. My son pauses it. He sits back. This is during the COVID homeschooling period. And he looks at me and he goes, "That's propaganda." He says, "That's bullshit." He's 8 years old. He says, "That's wrong." And I said, "What's wrong about it?" He says, "I'm not exactly sure, but the way that they put that, the way they framed that and said it," he says, "I know they're trying to trick me." And he thought about it for a few minutes and he realized which parts of it were lies and which parts of it were true. And I haven't specifically taught him this. But here's the thing. Most parents lie to their children and manipulate them to get them to behave. Now, the parents think they're doing this for good reasons, but the end result is the child becomes very easy to manipulate because that's how I behave. If I give in to manipulation, I get praised for it. I get rewarded. I get the love of my parents. And therefore, I'm not going to resist. I never manipulate my son or lie to him. And when someone tries to do it, it just sets the hairs on the back of his head going, like he knows something is up. And that's what a lot of younger people are getting now, is that they're becoming immune to it, even if they don't understand what the manipulation is or what the truth is. They just know that something about how these people are saying things is off.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wrote a book on manipulation specifically. It's censoring it. No, specifically designed to help people be able to identify exactly what the manipulation that they're receiving is. And then in the case of personal relationships, create a situation in which the other person has to stop using manipulation and begin using honest dialogue and persuasion to get us to cooperate. Now, a lot of people will say, your children must obey. You must discipline. Any sign of indiscipline must be punished harshly. And I'm thinking, that's exactly what I do to train a slave.
Yeah.
I don't want to raise a slave. I want to raise a free man. If I want to raise a free man, I must treat him like a free man. I must give him respect. And so I raise my kids that way. And people comment that they're very well behaved and that they're quite independent functioners. Even the 2-year-olds will they're hungry. They don't ask for food. They go get food. They'll go and grab an apple, grab a banana, eat the whole banana, including the peel. They'll just go and take care of themselves. And, they want water. They go pour their own water. They drink it. And the reason is because I've treated them with that expectation that they can take care of themselves, that they are the masters of their own lives. And I am here to assist them in their growth into that mastery. And I think this is a very different concept from parenting than most people have, but it produces a different type of child.
Yeah, I mean, if you try to make your child a slave to you and obedient to you, as they get older and they have a more powerful slave master, they're going to rebel against you and serve the stronger master, which is the state.
Yes.
So it really is a matter of, I think a lot of guys, they have an ego about this, including, and their whole reason for even being counterculture right now is about trying to reclaim their own ego. And, they need women to do this. They need women to do that for them because it's about their own ego validation. So talk about this. I mean, you talked about it in the sense of parenting, but talk about it in the sense of marriage and relationship. How does it apply to women?
So there are basically 3 kinds of women. They're the kind that won't work with a man. So it's just impossible to work with them. There's the kind that will submit to a man, and then there's the kind that will cooperate with a man. And you can make a relationship work with the kind that will submit and cooperate. However, most men, they're looking, or at least in their mind, they're looking for the woman that submits. The problem with that is you end up with another child, and you got to manage her because she sits there going, "What do you want next?" And that's kind of fun in the dating stage. It might be fine when you have no children, but I want to be able to leave the house and go away and know that I don't have to phone her up and go, "Don't forget to feed the kids." You want the woman that's cooperative. Now that's a spectrum as well. You want the woman that goes, "What's my husband has told me his plan. What role can I play to boost his plan? What can I do to make his plan work out better?" And you don't have to tell them what to do. You don't have to instruct them. You just let them do their thing, and they handle their aspect of stuff. They don't have to submit to you, because you don't have to tell them what to do, because they already know.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that historically was how women, for example, in the aristocracy behaved. And what we need to do, and we've been doing this in Europe for about 5,000 years, we've been moving aristocracy concepts farther and farther down to lower and lower groups of people, to the point where we almost are the culture of aristocracy, where we all try to be, every man a warrior, every man a king in his own home, this type of thing. And we need to think in that terms, where we're looking for women that are capable of managing themselves and the family when we go out. When we go out to work, when we go out to deal with things, we're heading into uncertain times. What will happen to us, I don't know. Some men feel the need that we have to put ourselves on the front line. You know about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to make sure we have women that we can go and do that and not worry that they don't have the home front nailed down. You don't find that in purely submissive women. They need the man there, moment by moment, just to function. So we need to look for the cooperative women. You don't get cooperative women by being a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
Because those women, they have some of that desire for freedom themselves. Cooperation comes out of two free people voluntarily working together. That comes through persuasion. Submission very often comes through violence and manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
whereas cooperation comes through mutual dialogue and creating a situation in which you can work together. Rethinking what kind of woman men are looking for is going to make a big difference. And for women, even rethinking what role they can play. Now it's a responsibility for a woman. See, a woman that's submissive doesn't have a responsibility except to listen.
Yeah.
A woman that's cooperative, she has a big responsibility. And I understand a lot of women, they don't want that responsibility. They don't want any responsibility. Just do what I'm told. If it doesn't go well, the man's fault.
Mm-hmm.
If you're cooperating, if it doesn't go well, you got to fix it. You can't always bring the problems to him, because he's got his own things to deal with. This is why it's a thing of the aristocracy. If you're a king, you don't have time for your queen to be bringing you every single problem. Only the ones she can't deal with, but not everything. And if we think about it more in that way, we're going to create higher agency women, and men have more time then to spend on more important things rather than micromanaging their family.
Yeah, I mean, and it also neutralizes the main arguments of feminism,
Yes.
which is, the sort of, they always use this straw man argument about how a man is just controlling a woman. Like, there is some stupid thread, which I'm writing in response to this, actually, but there's some stupid thread that was put out and kind of went viral, talking about, patriarchy and how women were just these, basically property and cattle, to be bred, and that was all that they had as a purpose. And, leaving aside the fact that this says a lot about that particular woman's fantasies.
Yeah, exactly what I was thinking.
Imagine this. I mean, where can you actually find that today? Like, maybe in rural Afghanistan. Like, I don't really know. And that's probably being unfair to the rural Afghanis. I mean, it's really not a real scenario that's existed. And I think,
well, and it's even a reaction. It's a reaction to very hard and dangerous times. If there's hard and dangerous times where dangerous groups of men are running around stealing and robbing and killing and raping, you'd rather belong to a strong man who will protect you than to just be doing your own thing independently and in danger. And a lot of what we're judging from the past is just reactions to very dangerous times. And the moment that we have those dangerous times again, things can start shifting that way again. Of course, they'll always exaggerate it, but.
Well, it's interesting because you go back to state of nature tribes, and they tended to be either very matriarchal or very patriarchal in these extremes. And of course, the matriarchal tribes, there was a lot less of them, because if they encountered the patriarchal tribes, they wouldn't make it very long. So the matriarchal tribes were usually more isolated, and they didn't have as much competition. And also, they only worked in very small sizes. They didn't scale. But as you're saying, those kind of really extreme, like, we don't care at all about like how women's emotions, it's all about power and survival. That came from such a deep level of primitivism. And it was basically like, I'll give an example of this. I always thought it was really interesting in Islamic history. A lot of people today look at the fact that in Islam, a man can have 4 wives as this kind of anachronistic sort of thing and how it's not right. And they contrast it with, even patriarchal structures in Christianity, etc. But in defense of Islam, if you actually know the historiography of the Arabian Peninsula, you understand that in the Hijaz, that sort of area where Mecca, Medina is, you had Arab tribes, and it was this state of nature sort of thing. You had a small handful of men who would have like 10, 12 wives, and the kids were dying, because there wasn't enough food. It was like constant warfare. And so Islam, when it moved into there, it was a reform, and it said, look, stop this bullshit. You can't just like collect tons of women. You can have up to 4 wives, and you have to be able to provide for each new wife that you add. Otherwise, you can't have more wives. And so I think that what these sort of straw man arguments are miss is that men themselves, as they build civilization, patriarchy evolves actually more towards a balanced and supportive environment for women. The issue is that, does it get to a certain tipping point, kind of like we have now in the West, where we start to where we say, actually, we got to leave that foundation. We're going to start to chip away put too much on top of that foundation and then tip it over.
Yeah, well, if you look, for example, in Athens versus Sparta. So Sparta didn't treat their kids very well. They didn't treat, the women were not treated, men and women were not treated like people. They were treated like property of the state. And because of that, children weren't treated well. And because of that, we have, they didn't reproduce at a very high rate.
Yeah.
And they had high attrition because they were constantly fighting. And their lifestyle meant that a lot of them just didn't grow up. And then you have Athens, where women were treated very well and protected well. And then they in turn raised their children better, which meant their children were more likely to survive and reproduce. If you treat your wife bad, she's going to treat your sons bad. And if you're a man, the number one wealth you have is in your children. That is your wealth. Mm-hmm. Everything else is about making sure your children are taken care of. Because when you're old, your gold and your silver, this is historically, your gold and your silver and your animals aren't going to take care of you. It'll be your sons that protect you and your daughters that care for you. Mm-hmm. And when you don't take care of your women, you just don't have that. We are massively, the entire arguments of feminism completely do not take into account the power that women have over family life and men. Mm-hmm. They already have a realm, a sphere of power within the home. We have to trust our women with our children. We trust our women to raise our children to follow our culture, to be loyal to their family and their tribe. And when you treat your women badly, they defect and they raise kids. And we see this as, every time you see some trans kid or something, it's always the mother pushing the kid into this. Mm-hmm. Treated poorly, now she's going to teach her children to defect.
Yeah.
She's punishing her parents, her father, is what it is. And she's teaching her children to defect from society and from the norms that her father would have held dear. And in this way, she's rejecting him. If we treat our women badly, we lose our children. And what's the point of doing any of the things we're doing if we're losing our kids? And so that is the fundamental reason why in society, almost always women were treated a lot better. Free women were treated a lot better than what anything that feminists give credit for.
Now here's a controversial topic, and I'm curious on your take on it, because there's a lot of stuff. A lot of guys push this in the manosphere. And this bounces a little bit off of, the Islamic compromise kind of situation. If you're a man of a certain level of status and power, is it appropriate for you to be able to have either multiple wives or at least a kind of concubine dynamic. Because, you know, you look at, like, you correctly talked about these women who were, if not bred to lead, they were bred to help leaders, right?
Yeah.
Like the aristocracy educated their women, and they were viewed as assets. I don't mean that in like the derogatory term. Like, they wanted them to be as intelligent and educated and capable as possible. And so men would marry those women, and they'd kind of make them the queen, right? But very often those guys would also have mistresses who were maybe more of the, I don't really contribute much besides for looking good and, you know, fun escape. So what are your takes on this dichotomy?
Well, in the historical context, your wife was for gentle procreative sex, and the mistresses were for the things that you wouldn't do with your wife because, you know, that wouldn't be very respectful type thing. And that had a lot to do with it. And part of it was that you can't get a woman pregnant like bam, 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 one after the other. It'll kill her. And these women were too valuable for that. People don't understand that having mistresses at that time was for the wife's benefit, not just for the man. So they were ensuring that she could be every 3 years or so, with 2 to 3 years. That's about ideal. You know, modern medicine, she could probably do it every 2 years and be just as healthy as they had to be every 3. And you want as many heirs as you can, but I mean, there's a limit to how fast you can get them pregnant over and over again. A lot of these aristocracy women were marrying very young as well. So there's this compromise where we'll make sure that we don't get you pregnant too often, but I'm still a man and I have needs. And the higher a man is in status, it seems that the higher his sex drive is. Is it because the high drive gets him up in the status, or vice versa? It doesn't really matter. It just is what it is. And so this was it sounds terrible for modern women to hear this. Men kind of go, yeah, that makes sense. But it was a kindness for her that he took out some of that sexual needs that he had with other women so that she could have a healthy life and not be constantly pregnant. The other reason is that a lot of times these marriages were business deals.
Yeah.
And on both their parts, they didn't hate each other necessarily, but they weren't in love. And so it was accepted. This is just the way it is. Now, as far as it goes today, I have met a lot of women who spontaneously said, because when women say, I'm looking for a relationship, and I'm like, monogamous, or what type of thing you're looking for, I've had a lot of women go, they would be okay as a mistress or second wife or third wife to somebody if the man was sufficiently high in status.
Yeah.
So the thing is that a woman isn't going to marry a man that's roughly on her status and be third wife. If she's third wife, that means he's a status so high she could never get him on her own. And in that circumstance, with a shortage of men, I mean, go walk in a park and see men, and it's like 1 of 100 is men. With the shortage of masculine men that we have, it is very reasonable that women would prefer to have their children with a man than with a boy that they have to take care of, even if that meant sharing him. And a lot of women, not all women have the sex drive to fulfill a man. And for some women, it's like, no, it's less stress for me. And I've got these other sister wives to talk my problems out with. You know, most of the time when women are saying, I bring these problems to my husband, but he doesn't want to listen, I'm like, well, then talk to your friends. I don't have any friends. And I'm thinking, there is a solution to that. You know, it's not a popular solution. Who I find don't like it. So high status men and low status women love this idea.
Sure.
High status women and low status men hate it.
Yeah.
So high status women don't want to share the men because they could get a man all to themselves and they don't want to share. And low status men don't want all the women being gobbled off the market because they have no shot at one then. So most disagreement is not based on morals, it's based on personal interest.
So to elaborate on that, you were talking earlier about the women who just kind of submit, and then the women who are more on the cooperative end. Cooperative women, oriented women, tend to be higher status. They're more personally developed.
Yes.
So what you're suggesting is that those women, because of the nature of the dynamic between her and the man, are way less likely to be okay with this kind of dynamic versus the sort of submit woman.
Yes, to a certain extent. Now, interestingly, so my wife is a very competent person. She can run a business. She can, she teaches at a school as well as running a business. She has all kinds of stuff because she's got such an active mind that for her it's very difficult to sit still too long.
Yeah.
And so she loves the kids and like takes care of the kids. In fact, she teaches the kids and gets paid to do it.
Mm-hmm.
She's arranged a way to do that. But even she recognizes that it'd be nice to have another woman around to handle the boring tasks that she doesn't want to do. That's what second and third wives do. They handle the boring tasks that your first wife, who's your business partner, and you're like, she's the queen, you're the king,
Mm-hmm.
and the others are there to handle some of the boring tasks as well. There's a practical aspect to it, and that is, I think it's hard for a lot of people will react emotionally to it. If you think about it in a purely objective way, it can make sense. It can be a practical thing. Now it's even more practical in history, like you mentioned, if a lot of the men are dying off. Mm-hmm. If you're in a place where a lot of men are dying off, if you're and basically that's what's happening to us in the West. They're not physically dying. They're just dying as men.
Yeah.
They're no longer men anymore. And I think demand and popularity for marriages with more than one woman is going to increase.
Yeah, and it's interesting because men are nature's experiments. So we have, everyone talks about how men and women are equal, the debate between men and women being equal and men being on the elite end of everything. And the two are actually correct in the sense that if you look at an IQ bell curve, men and women are on average of the same intelligence. It's just that at the end of the male bell curve stretches longer. So men are at the elite, but no one ever talks about the men, the 90% of prison people who are men, for stupid shit, right? So it's in the number of men that have, genetic issues and mental problems. Men are easily discarded. And so you look at society, you have the lower sort of quarter of men arguably wouldn't really reproduce. And then you had more like most guys would have a woman to varying degrees of quality. And then when you start to get to the elite stages, maybe you start to have two, and then you get to the very top, like the king maybe has 4+, right? But it was this sort of balanced out that the bottom 10% wouldn't get anything, the top 10% would maybe get more. And that's just always been the case. Another thing to your point, which is interesting, a lot of people are not aware of this. I don't know if it's called like the War of the Triple Alliance or something like that, but in South America in the 1880s, little Paraguay, actually it was bigger back then, but spoiler alert. But they fought this war against Argentina, Brazil, and essentially also Uruguay and Britain. And you can imagine how that went for them. It was kind of like what we're seeing what we probably will see in Ukraine by the end of all this, which is that by the end of the war, I think it was only 1 out of 13 men were still alive.
Jeez.
Like it was, and many of them were wounded. It was actually like total war, total obliteration. And the Catholic Church actually temporarily allowed men to marry multiple women because, I mean, you had like a 10-to-1 differential of women to men. And so it was like for a generation, you got a dispensation to marry as many women as you want just to fix it. So I do think that we're seeing that right now where a lot of people are just not going to make it. They're not going to make it. So talking a little bit more about manipulation, because I know you wrote a book on this. What about, like, when it comes to dating? What do you really see going on with women that men need to be careful about? Because, I talk about girl game a lot, and I'm curious. Like, I think it's great that you have this book out there, because a lot of men are thinking about, oh, how do I attract women? How do I gain women, right? But they don't ever think defensively. They don't think, very often they think they're gaming a woman, but they're actually being played themselves. So
Yeah. A guy who's new at trying to game women and gets sudden success is probably being gamed himself.
Yeah.
Like, if you're like, why is she's way too good looking for me or whatever, you're probably getting gamed.
Yeah.
And if you understand the basics of it, I mean, when we describe masculine and feminine coercion techniques, the masculine technique tends to be violence, Doesn't mean only men do it. Women can be violent too. And feminine tends to use the manipulative technique because it plays to their strengths. Well, women are masters at this. They can do it so well that even they don't know they're manipulating. It can become such a program, and they do it unintentionally in some cases. And most of them learned it from their mother. So it was their mother's milk, like they grew up on it. Mm-hmm. And men grew up listening to their mother's manipulation and cooperating with it. Women grew up listening to it and learning from it. And so we've both been cultured into just accepting female manipulation. It's better just to go along with it. So even guys that know they're being manipulated will go along with it anyway, because they think that that's what they're supposed to do. It worked out when they were a kid, I went along with mom, I got an ice cream, Mm-hmm. So they're doing this as adults. And there are some very specific techniques that people use for manipulation. There is the problem with the manipulation, even if men use it, like if you use manipulative pickup artist tactics, it's going to be hard to then create a relationship with that woman because you've sown this distrust for yourself in there. That's fine if you just want to get laid. But if you want to have a relationship, then you've created this distrusting atmosphere, and it's really hard to build on that. And I've had clients come to me and go, I got this girl, I'm dating her. He describes basically, he built it on a sand castle. Like it's all bullshit. He says, how do I turn this into a relationship? And I'm like, I don't think you can. Mm-hmm. I don't. She doesn't even know you. She knows the you you're pretending to be. Well, women can do that, and guys will often just ignore it. We talk about women being the romantic ones and men being the rational ones, and that's true when it's not to do with romance. So when it's to do with like self-image, for example. Then when it gets into romance, guys' brains shut off, and we start thinking way too emotionally very often. And, I've had so many clients go, if I lose her, I'll never find someone as good as her again. Tell me your history. Well, I dated a woman here, and then one here, and then one here, and then one here. And like, okay, and if you lose the one here, what'll happen? You think you're going to go back here? Oh, you're going to go here. And it's just hard for them to comprehend that, because she's got them well enough wrapped around their finger. And about once every 3-4 months, I meet a woman, and they're not necessarily manipulative, but they've got the charm. They know, like I feel with all of my resistance to manipulation and being happily married, I still feel pull. Mm-hmm. Like I got to get that person out of my life because that's not safe if you're married. But I'm like, this woman will get any man she wants. And it is a skill. It can be applied in a healthy way. But the problem with guys is they don't know what to look for. One of the big mistakes that a lot of men do, and this tends to go along with some sort of level of autism, it seems, is they start off by telling her exactly what they want in a woman. Mm-hmm. And that's great if you have an honest woman who's then going to tell you the truth in return. But if you're dealing with a manipulative woman, you just said, here are the buttons you can push to get me to do what you want. And then she's going to push those buttons. I'm less suspicious of the woman that says, I don't know if I want kids, and I don't know if I want to get married in a relationship, than the woman that says, I figured out what you want. I'm going to tell you exactly that.
Yeah. I want to have 10 kids, because
I want to wear flower dresses and run in a field of wheat,
And you see that all the time. I just want to interject. You see that all the time in the manosphere. All these little, validation farming accounts. These girls come
Yeah.
on here, and you have guys who constantly talking about what they want, and you have some Zoomer girl or Fed, whatever, who's telling them exactly that, and then they get pulled into it. They get obsessive.
Yeah, you've called a few of them out in the past, and I think for guys like us, we look at these girls and it's so obvious that they're not what they're advertising that my first instinct is not to even warn anybody about them, because I'm like, this is kind of obvious. This is a trap, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is obviously a trap. But it's not obvious to men that are hungry for female validation.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things about becoming immune to manipulation is to stop manipulating yourself.
Yeah.
Which means, stop being hungry for external validation of all sorts. Learn how to give yourself internal validation. Learn how to know objectively whether what you're doing is right or wrong, good or bad. And to stop tricking yourself, stop believing that your needs don't matter, that your plans for the future don't matter, that you have to be the one that always adjusts to everything else in the world. And to remember that the strategies you had to deal with being a child and deal with perhaps a narcissistic mother or something, those aren't going to those were great in childhood. They helped you survive. They're going to get you killed as an adult.
Yeah.
They're going to ruin your life. And you need to pick a whole new set of strategies. And you need to run those strategies that are going to make you successful. And I think most people aren't capable of self-identifying which strategies they're running are unhealthy and which ones they can keep. And that's why people come to coaches to a large extent, is to have someone to bounce that off of. Well, when this happens, I do this. And you go, well, that's why you have that result. Here's what you do instead. And help them to retrain them into a different pattern of behavior. That's really the very first step in becoming immune to that. And to have lower expectations. I talk to people constantly. Of course, I don't have any romantic expectation. I'm just talking to everyone. Talk to everyone I meet in my neighborhood. I'm a foreigner here, so I'm in Portugal, so I want to be really, really friendly so that if shit hits the fan, everybody knows that guy's solid. He's not a problem. When we're calling the immigrants, don't call him. He's friendly.
Yeah.
I want to be on the good guy list. So I get to know everybody and help everybody out. And my only expectation on all of these interactions is that the person is, responds in kind.
Yeah.
If I'm kind to them, they're kind to me. If I'm friendly to them, they're friendly to me. That's the only expectation I have. If men interacted with women with the only expectation they had is that they would have a pleasant interaction, they'd be a lot farther ahead.
Yeah. And I think for the guys who are online and who are looking to date online, and when I say online, I mean this sort of dating within the internet community online, which I think is overall a better way of going forward, because we need to create real life communities. What you're doing, talking to people around, is so important, and that needs to happen more. But a lot of this also is we develop our own values and develop our own sense of identity, and also from this online kind of zeitgeist. And I don't think it's unreasonable for people to be meeting each other through that community. You meet online, and then you move someplace together, and then you get married, have kids, and maybe a bunch of people start to move to certain locations, and we start to create communities that are self flourishing. But I've found very often that the guys need to pay attention to how loud a woman is about trying to express this stuff. Like the female accounts who don't show pictures of themselves and up front, right, and are more interested, they're not trying to be the big account that everybody pays attention to. Those are green lights. I would say those are green flags, to see what's going to happen. All the successful relationships that I know of that occurred on Twitter occurred from very small accounts kind of interacting in someone's slipstream, or some DMs going on. It's never these girls who are just look at me, I'm so trad, flower dress, tits out, you know what I mean? Very often and I think this is the stuff, is that guys need to understand their own fantasies in order to become immune from manipulation. Like what you said right there was so profound about how even if you know all this stuff, even if you understand manipulation, you run into a beautiful woman who's very charming and throws it at you, you know how it's affecting you. And the humility about that is like the defensive line. It's like, I know what I am and am not capable of dealing with. And so if I open myself up to this attack from her, I'm gonna eventually, it's gonna start to degrade my position in my marriage and my relationship. And so you just withdraw from it. And I think a lot of guys have a hard time with that, because it's like they get like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong. You know, I'm just like, it's not my problem that she likes me. It's like they don't understand the validation that they're receiving. And the woman you're with recognizes it. She can see that you're dependent on that, and that makes her trust you less.
Yeah, it's remarkably dangerous if you're already married to give charming women attention.
Yeah.
And you no matter how, like I got a lot of, I'm really high in conscientiousness. I have a lot of self-discipline and self-control. And I absolutely know if I let these women work on me, that I'm going to ruin my marriage.
Yeah.
So I got to put them away. And it's not necessarily there's anything wrong with them.
Mm-hmm. They're
just charming. And if on top of that, they and I click, okay, that one conversation where I meet you and I see what you're like, and then, you know, usually it's about vetting somebody in a friend group. You know, should we let this person in our friend group? And I'm vetting them for that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, she seems nice and all. I don't want to see her again. Just keep her out of my face. And it's a lot of men just don't do that because their own marriage isn't sufficiently satisfying. You know, we talk about women want attention. There's a lot of men that want attention too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of men, they are craving female validation, female attention. And if you're not getting it from your spouse, or you're not getting it in the way that you need it from your spouse, you're easily going to be pulled in by women that give that to you. And there are good women that do just the way they are, and then there are malicious women as well. And those kind of women go around preying on men. And there are, I've talked with women that said their objective was to get this other guy who's married to sleep with them because they don't like the wife, or, you know, it's basically catty woman on woman thing. And the man just ends up being used as a tool in a fight between two women. This is not unusual. This is fairly common. And we got to keep our heads about us as men. We got to recognize that no matter who we think we are, there's going to be somebody that games better than us. Mm-hmm. We're going to get outgamed. This is why I say become immune to manipulation. It's like when you're immune to the cold virus, it doesn't mean you never get sick.
Right.
It just means it doesn't kill you and you don't get very sick.
Right.
You know, I start to get manipulated, and then I go, wait a minute, that's not right, and I back out before any damage occurs. Mm-hmm. I'm fine. The problem is if you go, I'm getting manipulated and I kind of like it.
Yeah.
And you let yourself get sucked right in, then you're in trouble. And and that woman's not going to keep you. If she can get you that easily, she can get a man a level or two above you, which is what she's going to stick with, not you.
So shifting gears a little bit, I mean, because you talked about, you just kind of made a comment there about having a great marriage. Like, talk about that. You know, you put out on Twitter a couple, first off, you know, in response to something I said about how often you guys have sex. You and your wife have sex about 4 or 5 times a week, 30 plus minutes most of the time with that. How did you know, because a lot of guys who are married and who are looking at that, they're like, how on earth do you pull that off with 3 kids? So talk about what brought your marriage to that point. Was it something that was always like that, or was there like a dip? What did you guys realize? And also, you mentioned about how sex is different in dating and versus in relationships, and how, you know, people shouldn't contrast these shouldn't mess these two things up. Like you need to get the right, you need to see what it's like at the beginning because it's going to be the same later on. So just kind of go through that with us.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning part about when you have kids. A lot of people have less sex, and it should be the other way around. You need to have even more sex because you need to keep that bond strong, because if you have no kids and you get divorced, you only hurt each other. Mm-hmm. If you have kids and you get divorced, that's a big deal. And so you really need to keep that relationship even stronger when you have children. And a lot of people are like, I don't understand how you can do this when you have kids around. I'm like, don't your kids cooperate with you? If I ask my son, I say, I need to spend some alone time with mom. You take your little brothers and go in the living room and play Legos for, half an hour, 45 minutes. I'm going to go talk to, I say talk. He knows that we're not talking, but, he doesn't want to know too much. He's 8 years old. He's like, la, 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 la. So I'm like, just go keep them in there. And he'll do it. He'll keep them in there and won't bother us. And the thing is that he understands, I've explained to him, alone time with mom, that's when we bond together. That's what keeps us close to each other and helps us to be a better mother and father for you, because we're better as husband and wife. And so he understands that. He doesn't need to know exactly what we're doing. He doesn't need to know the details. As they say, doesn't need to know how the sausage is made, just needs to know at the end that the result he gets is a happy family. Yeah. And see, that's when I say about manipulation, it's not like people will trick the kid into staying in the room. No, don't trick him. It's good for him that his parents are in love with each other. Let him know that it's good for him and that we need to spend time together, and it makes us happy. Therefore, we're better parents. And, I think people really underestimate how cooperative their kids want to be, because they're so often demanding of the kids. And the kids, especially boys, man, all three of my boys, their very first report card from school said they don't like to cooperate. No, they don't like to do what they're told. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, they don't. They won't listen to what they're told. They will do what you ask them to do. They won't do what they're told to do. Yeah. So get your kids in that habit of family cooperation, and you just say, I need 45 minutes. Get 45 minutes in case you need it all. I need 45 minutes. Let us be alone. But I think really people use the children as an excuse. That's a bullshit excuse. You give a kid a screen if necessary. Save your marriage. Kid has half an hour on the screen. It's a trade. What it really is most men are in too poor shape to do anything for 45 minutes. Okay. Their wife is too burned out because they've given her too much to do. Mm-hmm. So she's completely burned out. And if she's got 45 minutes, she's going to sleep. Yeah. Which she's half doing anyway during sex. So he's not that interested. And you add this all together and you having shit quality sex, who it's not that interesting. So why have it 5 times a week? Right. It should be like you're both soaked in sweat and the ending is so good you nearly pass out. Yeah. That's what it should be. And then you're going to want to do it 5 times a week. And you're even going to go 5 times a week isn't enough. I wish we had more time in the day. Yeah. That's the ideal, is continually craving each other. In fact, I think it is good to have sex slightly less than you want so that the craving is always there. You're always hungry so that you're always trying to impress each other and take care of each other. But people just don't do anything with professionalism anymore. Yeah. They half-ass everything, including sex. And if you half-ass stuff, it's not going to be fun. Right. And by the way, if you're looking to marry someone and you want to know if they're going to be good in bed or not, check how well they do everything in life. Mm-hmm. If it's a guy or a woman, look how's their form when they're working out. If they play a sport, this is why people are always attracted to dancers, because dancing requires you to perfect physical movements. Mm-hmm. Not only are you fit, but you've taken the time to think about what you're doing and become good at it. If your spouse can become really good at something, they can become really good at sex. But so many people today aren't good at anything. There's nothing they do where they put the effort into mastering. So they're not going to do that with sex either. And then people will say, I got to have sex before marriage in order to know if we're sexually compatible. I got news. Every penis and every vagina of an adult are compatible. With a few anatomical outliers. Yeah. Yeah, like a few anatomical outliers, no. But that's unusual, and you'd probably heard the rumor about that if that was the case.
Yeah.
What it is are our needs compatible? Do we want to take care of each other? And all of that can be seen before. The problem with premarital sex is it's exciting because it's new.
Mhm.
All you're saying is, do I have exciting sex with a new partner? And generally, novelty is exciting for men, and for I think a lot of women too. Novelty is exciting.
Mhm.
You can only have so much novelty of married sex. At a certain point, you've done everything that can be done 10 times over, and then you're doing the bread and butter thing that you both enjoy repeatedly, and that if that you can't make it pleasure out of that, then you're in trouble. But you don't know that until you've been married for years, and that has more to do with the strength of your relationship and how much both of you are willing to put into the relationship versus anything sexual. The sexual stuff is a result of the relationship, not the cause of it.
Yeah, so go more into that, because this is like a perennial question, and I would argue like a fight within the manosphere about, is it more of like the man pulling back, dread game kind of stuff that stimulates a woman's desire, and that it's really all about just amping up your desirability, and that's what makes a woman's sex drive go up? Or is it more about this connection? And if it is about the connection, what does that even entail for a man to
There's
that?
Broadly speaking, there's two kinds of women. There are emotionally damaged women, so basically daddy issues is the main cause, but there's emotionally damaged women and emotionally healthy women.
Mm-hmm.
If you play dread game on emotionally healthy women, they'll just leave you.
Yeah.
They have no patience for dread game because they don't need you. They're emotionally healthy. They can go find another guy tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so dread game is backfires. And then you have emotionally damaged women, and they're only happy when they're suffering.
Yeah.
Like they like to suffer, they physically and emotionally. And the key is you got to find out what your woman thrives on. What kind, how do you push the buttons on her that give her what she needs? Okay. My wife is emotionally healthy, so dread game doesn't work on her. I tell her what I need, and then she gives me what I need. And that's because, she had a father her entire life, and, no father's perfect, but she had a father her whole life. And so she doesn't have those issues. And was very tightly bonded to her father. In fact, like she got along better with her father by far than her mother. And she had, when she was a kid, she was around a lot of boys because there wasn't a lot of girls her age. So she understands how to interact with men in a positive way, which made it very easy for her and I to interact. The damaged women, there's a complexity there, because even dread game on a damaged woman can go too far where she believes she can't please you anymore. Mm-hmm. When she thinks she can't please you anymore, she'll give up.
Yeah.
It's natural. So you can push it too far. You don't know it's too far until you've gone too far, and then it's too late. And that's a huge risk you have. My preference would be, if I had a woman like that, would be to help her heal from her issues so that I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I want to be able to, I'm not the kind of guy that wants to provide instability. I want to provide stability for my woman. Every woman I talk to, even the damaged ones, deep inside, it's stability that turns them on, not instability. They want excitement. They want the fantasy of danger and excitement. But they don't actually want danger and excitement. They avoid that as much as they possibly can. And so if you can give them the fantasy of danger and excitement with stability, they get the best of both worlds. But again, it's figuring out what works on her. You wouldn't say, if you're trying to physically pleasure a woman, you wouldn't, all women are alike and I'm going to do the exact same thing on each woman. Mm-hmm. It's just a hit and miss then.
Yeah.
Works, doesn't work. In fact, probably doesn't work more often than it works. No, you figure out what works on your woman. And this is part of the reason being married longer works, because you start to, nobody has to communicate their needs anymore. You already know. 20 years of marriage, you already know. It should be the same with the psychological, emotional needs too. figure out what works on that person, provide them what they need. You know, she should be doing the same to you. What works on you? Some guys don't even need validation from their spouse at all. They don't need to be told anything. They just need to basically be left alone. And other guys, they really want to know their wife approves of them. Okay, if it's in a reasonable amount, I don't think that's a problem. If it's extreme, that's putting too much pressure on her, you know. But if that's what your husband wants, if kind words make him happy, give him kind words. If touch makes him happy, give him touch. If you know, doing small favors for her makes her happy, it's the 5 love languages thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Find out what works and do it. That is what love is. Love isn't, I like to do this and this is all I'm going to give you.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. It's not like this transactional kind of dynamic.
Yeah. And it's, the reality is we're, as men, we're going to give more to the woman than she gives to us, because she has to accumulate a surplus to make a baby and take care of them.
Yes.
We're not really giving it to her. We're giving it to her so she can make a baby out of it. So we got to give her more resources, energy, time, and attention than we get back, so that she turns that into children for us. And you know, you have to understand that's the whole point of getting married. Basically, if you don't want to have kids, most men, there's no interest in getting married if you don't want to have kids.
Right.
That's why you're doing it.
What's the value proposition, really?
Yeah.
Now, David Feldman, when we talked a few weeks back, he said a similar kind of thing, which is that you know, if the man is the head of the household, it's kind of like he's mirroring the dynamic with God. So he looks to God, and you know, God gives more than he gets, and it's the same thing for the man. He gives more than he gets, and I think that's very triggering for a lot of guys today, who feel like, well, you know, who feel like logically it should be equal, but emotionally they actually feel like they should get more from the woman, and that sets them up for failure, because it creates all sorts of resentment and creates this sort of avoidant pattern where they pull back.
Well, I know exactly why. It's, they don't want a wife, they want their mother. Their mother did not give them the attention they needed, and their mother should give them more than she receives.
Right.
I will give my children far more than they ever give to me, and I hope that they never have to give to me back a quarter of what I give to them, because I don't want that. I want to be the one giving to them. And what happens is you have guys that didn't get sufficient love from their mother. Their mom dropped them off at daycare. Their mom was busy, phone, whatever, sleeping around in some cases, whatever happened to be. They didn't get the love they needed, and that hole is still in their heart, and they haven't healed, and they haven't fixed that. Mm-hmm. And they think that they can get that from a woman that's roughly their own age.
Yeah.
So they end up with a mummy wife. Mm-hmm. And then their mummy wife treats them like a child. He gives them more than she takes, treats them like a child. Some women are into that too, but they don't find that sexually pleasing, so they're off cheating.
Yeah.
Because they do want a man in their life, and if their husband's not the man, who is the man? Like, you be the man in your wife's life, or someone else will be.
Yeah, and I'd say that there's even another type of that too, where if a man does get it from his mother, but doesn't have a good relationship with his father, and gets separated from his masculinity, then he kind of stays in this arrested development where he needs a woman to continue to validate him, like mom's overcompensation for dad, and that just ignores. Now, one thing you mentioned, just kind of offhand, but I think it's really interesting, because I think it's so understated, because it's not what guys in the manosphere ever want to hear. They want to hear about how they are really fucked up, and how, you know, woman wants Tyrone or something. You know, they want to hear all sorts of things that affect them emotionally, but very often women just don't want to have sex because they're exhausted. And so talk more about this, like, what do we as men need to do to I mean, I know it's different for every woman, right? Some women are more active than others, and also has to do with their own capacity to handle stress. But talk more about this, like, variable.
Let's just for a second, let's take stress and stop thinking about stress and excitement and all those things as separate entities, and say that people have a tolerance for stimulation. Okay, So all the stimulation that you can handle in one day, that can be physical, mental, emotional. Stress is one of those. Sex is stimulation. Just playing with your kids is stimulation. And you have a tolerance for how much of that you can handle in a day. So if the woman is done handling stress, not stress, tolerance for stimulation, and by the time, this is why I like to have sex in the morning, so we're still low in the stimulation arc. If she's done, and she's just done. She's not done with you. She's not rejecting you for sex. She's just done with life. She can't handle another hour of life. Yeah. And then you're coming home and demanding something from her, which is how she's going to perceive it. Even though it's a mutual exchange, she'll perceive it as a demand. Of course, she's not going to be able to comply. Mm-hmm. And the solution to that there's a couple of solutions. Wake up an hour early before you go to work, have sex in the morning. Mm-hmm. You should be waking up with a boner anyway. So, make use of it. Have sex in the morning when she hasn't had any stimulation yet and her energy levels are high. And you can also spend some alone time, just the two of you together before the kids get up. That works great. However it is that you work it out. The other thing is that, I hire a cleaning lady to come in and clean the house. So she's here 2-3 hours a day. She does all the basic cleaning. My wife only has to organize things and give her instructions. Yeah. She's very little in the cleaning to do. Because what I told her, as I said, bring this person in for 10, 12, 15 hours a week so I can buy 10, 12, 15 hours of your time. Yeah. So that you can then, and I'll gift you that, some of it, you're going to use that to relax. Some of that you're going to use with the kids. Some of that's going to be spent with me. I'm ensuring that you have the time you need. And that is, here it's not too expensive. In some places that's not viable, but figure out a solution. We want women to do everything that our grandmothers did and everything that modern women have to do. And it's too much. Yeah. And the trade-off is that we're not going to have as much sex. Yeah. So if you want to have more sex, believe me, if my wife gets bored, the tables flip and now she's the one chasing me. Yeah. Like if she's got nothing to do, she's the one chasing me. This is why couples go on a vacation and all of a sudden the wife is sexually open again. Well, yeah, because she's not got her kids hanging off her and a house to clean and people to feed. She's relaxed. Make sure that she's not overburdened. Whether that means that you allow her to, you arrange it so she can quit her job if she's working. Some women don't want to quit though. Some women would rather work and spend the money to have a house cleaned. That's just what they want to do. So you got to find out what works for her and what doesn't create stress for her, and encourage her. Now you have to encourage her because some women will seek out stress. Yeah. You have to encourage her and you have to explain to her that say, I need your time and energy, which means you have to budget it more carefully and don't take on so much. I told my wife that a few weeks ago. I said, I think you've taken on a few too many things. And for next year, for like start of the next cycles, we redo our cycles every September. We plan out our year. I said, we need to plan that you have at least another day off. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's spread throughout the week, but you have another day off because you need to rest a little more, and you need to have a little more time with me. Mm-hmm. And so she's rejiggling her schedule so that's possible. That is largely up to us because women, conscientious women, will take on tasks until they explode. Yeah. Like they won't say no because they just don't. They keep thinking they need to take on more, and we have to keep reminding them that those supplementary things are not what I value from you. This is what I value from you. Let's concentrate on those things, please. Or what is the thing you need taken off your plate? Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean we're going to do it. Maybe it means things are going to be organized differently. But if you've got it's your choice. Exhausted woman, no sex. Not exhausted woman and lots of great sex. So as a guy, just pick what you prefer.
Yeah, and I think this is it's a difficult conversation for guys because this is one of the elements. I mean, people focus on the desire aspect of being a high status male, but the reality is that the resources to be able to have your woman remain feminine, because work and labor diminishes femininity. You know, you can go in any society, you look at the working class woman, you're at, you know, working class women are very much in their masculine for the most part. They're usually pretty crass. Doesn't mean that people don't have sex, right? But it's not this sort of heavily polarized dynamic. It's the guys are drinking, the girls are throwing it back at them, and, you know, something happens, right? There's a lot of bickering. It may be, you know, I'm not to say they don't necessarily care about each other, right? But it's not a heavily polarized dynamic. And even, you know, that's reflected physically often. And that's how it's always been for that demographic. It was the upper class that had these women that exemplified beauty and grace and femininity. And, you know, a great example, of course, would be Melania, right? You have this model woman who very much fits the sort of image of this, you know, she's a mother, but she's not getting bogged down in drudgery when it comes to things that are going to drain out that feminine energy. And so guys, it's like, well, if you want your woman to be feminine, you have to give her the space to be feminine. And being feminine means being able to relax and luxuriate, you know, take a bath, whatever. Like, whenever you see these feminine goddess women or whatever in different communities, I mean, one of the big things that they talk about in their defense is that women need to just go do things to relax and pamper themselves, and guys need to understand that. And I think that the wealthy guys do get it. They do get it. So
throughout most of history, it was a luxury to have a woman that didn't work full time. People think trad means the wife doesn't work. Yeah, tell my great great grandmother that. I have a photo of my great great grandfather and my great great grandmother, and they're 3 boys and 1 girl. I'm descended from the girl. So everybody in that, including the baby, look like they have more testosterone in them than your average man does today.
Yeah.
They all look like they want to get in a fight with you. My great great grandmother has a big square jaw. They all do. Every single one of them has a big square jaw, like, you know, they're Chadley.
Yeah.
But they were Highlanders. They were Scottish Highlanders. They probably lived in a black house, which is, you know, a dirt floored hut with a straw roof where there's a fire in the middle and it's constantly smoky. You know, they lived hard, and those hard women look hard. We are in the richest society in the history of humanity, and we now have the opportunity to have wives that can work part-time or no time. Or I don't think it's good for women to have nothing productive to do, because I think a lot of women don't like that. But we can finally give them a balance. Okay, so it is a luxury. And, you know, you might not be able to do that when you first get married. It might take a couple of years to get that sorted out. But that should be a goal, I think, for most men. And if not, hey, you got to understand, you made a choice.
Right.
You cannot complain to her that you're not getting enough sex within reason. If the only days off she gets is Saturday and Sunday, and that's the only time you have sex, well, there's probably a correlation there. You know, help her. Yeah, the only days off, except she's cooking and cleaning on Saturday and Sunday, so really not a day off. You know, and you wonder why it's you're not getting the attention you want. Look at men that have a lot of money and are surrounded by beautiful women. Those women are not scrubbing the floor. They have other women to scrub the floor. Mm-hmm. Now, like the Tate brothers, look at them. Those girls around them are not scrubbing the floor, I guarantee you.
No.
They got other women to scrub the floor. And those women don't look like the women that they have around them.
Right.
You know, your woman's appearance is a reflection of how well you take care of her, which is a reflection of your status as a man. So choose what you want. Guys just don't like to choose. We want, like every other human, we want all the benefits and none of the responsibilities, because that's what humans want. That's the temptation.
Well, that's it. I mean, and part of this, and this is going to sound really harsh, and I want guys to always remember that they can change their position.
Yeah.
But in the past, people really knew their place in society. You know, if you were an artisan, you were a peasant, you knew where you were at, And when you saw nobility, you knew who the nobility was. And there was and I'm not personally of the perspective that people should not, like, I don't like rigid hierarchies. So I don't like the idea that somebody who maybe had more talent would not be able to access that class because of this. But there was a level as a result of this of like today you have people who look at celebrity culture and all sorts of stuff because they're being sold a lie. They're told that, oh, well, this is how a woman behaves for this guy. And then they get resentful that they don't have. And it's like, well, guess what? You're a bitch. You don't have anything remotely close to what that guy's offering. And so it's entitlement to think that you are going to deserve it. Your wife doesn't have time for you. She's exhausted. Well, you got to find a way to retire her, because if she's working 60 hours a week and you guys have 2 kids, the chances of her wanting to be down for sex are low because she's just going to be burned out. And the fact that she doesn't dress up sexy, she's burned out. The fact that she's not in shape, she's burned fucking out. She has no time to go to the gym. Guys need to understand that if you do need to lead, and there may be a lag time where you have to create this stuff, where you have to build it, and you can talk to her about it. You can tell her this is the mission, but at the end of the day, words are cheap. You can't just
take all that sexual frustration you have because your wife's too tired, and go and start a side gig and turn that into a business that allows you to let your wife retire.
Yeah. I mean, guys need to get more angry about it, but direct their anger in the proper direction.
Yeah.
It's not, don't direct it at her, which actually is one of the things that the structure wants, is for men and women to be pissed at each other, rather than be like, hey, we're both trapped in this thing together. Let's get out. Let's break out of it.
But you brought up something really important, is that it's what they're offering. So even when it comes to dating, I ask guys, I say to them, what are you offering her? Marriage. Yeah, but what? What do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by a relationship with you? Is it going to be fun and exciting? Like, what life do you have that you're going to share with her? And if their life is boring, all that women are going to see is, you want me to be part of your boring life.
Yeah.
I don't want that. The song Girls Just Want to Have Fun. They do. Women love to have fun, and that's good because they need that mentality to have fun with children, because kids learn primarily through play and fun. That's their job when they're little. And women need to be good. And in fact, I'm more concerned about a woman that doesn't enjoy playing and fun, because how is she going to do that with her kids? I'm more concerned about that. And I want women to go and be able to have some fun. A lot of guys, they resent the fact that she gets to have fun and they got to work. And it's like, that's how you get kids. She's going to go have fun playing with the kids and you're going to work. Like, I'm sorry, you were born a man. That's how it works. Just be glad you even qualify for a woman. But if you are often, men are getting rejected by women, it's not the woman rejecting them in particular. It's rejecting the lifestyle that they have to offer her. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of guys don't understand that. I have guys, I'm good looking, and I make a decent amount of money, and I'm fit, and women still aren't interested in me. Well, yeah, because you're boring. Yeah. You're really, really boring. You don't do anything interesting. You don't hardly have friends. You never have fun. You don't relax. I've never seen you laugh. What is going on with you? Just go have some fun. I'm not a fan of getting drunk, but like, dude, if at least you can force yourself to do that, force yourself to do something outside of normal for you and go have some fun and loosen up and take the stick out of your ass. And maybe women will like you. In fact, you don't even have to go look for women if you're having fun. Women look for the men that are having fun and join them. Usually guys are like, where do I meet women? I'm like, go have fun. They'll find you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go have fun, and how do I have fun? Well, what do you like to do? I don't like to do anything. Well, of course you don't. Go figure something out.
It's such a truism that whenever a guy is on the up and up, And he's like, man, I'm just like, things are so great. You know, I'm doing great with work. I'm just having a good time with my friends. And immediately there's like an attractive girl that comes into the picture.
Yep.
And, you know, if they don't have the proper grounding, she can derail them completely, because she's like, give me some of that fun. And then she, in her own way, takes him away from what he was doing, you know, pulls his attention towards her too much. And so then he loses his edge and everything. That happens a lot. But the point is still there, that women are always, they can sense this guy has fun. I want to be around him. Because women are bored. I mean, they're very, very bored. They're very, very bored. And that's why so much creative energy comes from women, because it's like this feminine energy which is like play, do something, make something. And the inspiration we get from this play is what builds society ultimately.
Mm-hmm. And I would say if a woman's watching this and she says, I kind of like this guy, and this is the usual story here. He's a good Christian man and he's solid in the faith, and he's good looking, he makes a good money. I just don't get the tingles around him. I'm not excited. Yeah, because he's boring.
Yeah.
So here's what you do. You go and you encourage him to do something fun with you. This nowadays, I'm never saying that women should take the lead in relationships. No. But now you have to be a little less subtle than you did before, because too many men are essentially emotional goofballs, and they don't understand how to take the lead. So, you got to do more than drop the handkerchief. You might have to write them a note, crumple it up in the handkerchief and then drop it for them. You might have to say, I would love to say something that's fun for you with you. I'd love to go hit balls at the batting cage with you. I don't know what they particularly like to do. I'd love to go for a walk in a park with you. Okay. And, the guys may or may not get the hint. Surprisingly, it sometimes almost takes another guy to tell them she likes you for them to take the hint, but encourage him to have fun. And you'd be surprised. Well, you probably wouldn't be, but most people would be surprised how many men said that their life was boring until they met their girlfriend and wife, and all of a sudden it became more exciting. I mean, this is a trope from movies. It's black and white. He meets the girl, and afterwards the world's in color. Mm-hmm. Because the women want to have fun, and in order to make her happy, you have fun too, and then you realize life's a lot more interesting. And kids, that's a whole other layer. A lot of the adaptions that men need to make for women, they're not actually making for the women. They're making because you need to make those adaptions so that when your children come along, you're already prepared to deal with them. Mm-hmm. Everything from allowing the other person to make their own mistakes and choices. You learn that with your wife. You see your wife doing something, instead of micromanaging her, you're like, okay, that's her responsibility. I let her do it her way. And you walk out of the room and just let her do it. You got to do the same thing with your kids. You tell them how to do something, and then they want to do it their way. Let them do it their way as long as it gets done.
Yeah.
And they'll figure it out. And you learn that with your spouse, because if you had to learn it with your kids, you'd probably hurt them along the way, hurt them emotionally. And a lot of what guys are preparing for really is having children when they're learning to deal with a woman.
Now, there's a thread, and I wrote about this on my email list, about, Med Gold put out this thing about and why women are going after, are having sex basically outside of marriage and sleeping with these sort of higher status, or really, let's be honest here, fun guys, right? So I guess we talk a lot about male agency here, and obviously if that's important, guys improving themselves, guys understanding what women want, it's going to get them more results. With women, it's not going to have a problem. In my perspective, I think you agree, getting girls if they can do that. But is there this, like, maybe you can't blame women for what they're doing right now? Do you agree with that? Can you blame them for going out and being a little promiscuous?
Throughout all of human history, the law recognized the fact that women have compromised agency in comparison to men. Mm-hmm. Now, you will still see that today. Two people get drunk, they have sex, the man gets charged with rape.
Right.
Now, of course, we're going to complain, oh, it's not fair, they were both drunk. No, the woman is not considered a full adult.
Yeah.
She's not considered fully responsible for her decisions. Now, the problem is our current state of affairs is that women get all the privileges of full agency without all the responsibilities. And so we got the worst of both worlds, because either extreme all the way is a problem. We got the worst of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And women much more than men, because the men tend to be more stubborn, less agreeable. You know, oh, you want me to do this? Screw you. I'm going to do my own thing. You know, I'm sure if I told my son to eat a chocolate bar, he'd throw the chocolate bar in the garbage. I'm not going to eat and do what I'm going to do what I'm told. I'm going to do what I want to do, and nobody can make me eat a chocolate bar. And just because I told him to do it, and he's disagreeable, you know. Women, on the other hand, they follow the dominant narrative. Most women today start off at least lovely, sweet, obedient, and cooperative to the dominant narrative. The problem is the dominant narrative is set by sexual predators in society. And they're following this, they're being groomed. And here's the worst part, it's 100% our fault, because we should be out putting those people underground. Mm-hmm. Men allowed this to happen. We allowed society to get out of hand. We allowed women to be preyed upon on an industrial scale. We allowed them to be incentivized into doing things that are unhealthy for them, that most of them regret as they get older. We allowed it to happen. And either, you know, the funniest thing is some of the red pill guys are like, women have no agency and should be responsible for everything they do. You know, it's like,
they want the
one of those statements is correct.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think women have no agency. I just don't think they have, on average, the agency that men have.
Well, I think what you're like, I think what you're saying is, and that you wouldn't even be opposed to, well, okay, let's give them equal responsibility for the privileges that they get. Because I think what we would see very quickly is that they're like, we don't want that agency. We don't want that responsibility. You know, they'll accept another renegotiation, you know, status quo antebellum, to go back to how it was before, at least to some degree, because it's only when they have to deal with the consequences, they're like, well, wait a minute, you know, like women getting drafted. You know,
well, and Westerners are the people of the aristocracy, and women in the aristocracy had more agency than your average man that was out of the aristocracy.
100%.
Okay, so these were women that could run an entire country while their husband was off at war. Right. They could run the estates. They had total control. They were in a position of authority over all the men under their husband when he was away. So they were very powerful. And we've been pushing aristocracy values down to the average person, like I said, for about 5,000 years. We've been trying to help the average person rise in agency to behave like the aristocracy. The British got the farthest in this. This is why every man's home is his castle, because every man was to behave like a king with high levels of agency over his family. Well, that meant that the wife should behave like a queen with high levels of agency as well. So we're promoting that. And I think whatever solution we come up with needs to say some women will not want to be responsible, some men will not want to be responsible for themselves. Okay? For those that don't want to demonstrate agency, great. You'll get told what to do, and you will have less power and control over your life. And those that are capable of demonstrating agency should be given the opportunity to have more control over their life. Mm-hmm. Should be able to demonstrate that agency, because ideally we'll all achieve a position where we are cooperating closer as peers. We may never be peers, but we might be very close in this way, and so that the cooperation between a high agency husband and high agency wife is much more enjoyable than between a mid-agency man and a low-agency woman. That will never be at the level of peace and cooperation and success that the others had.
People are so, I mean, this is deliberate kind of communist, you know, reinterpretation, revisionism, but the United States, which was obviously incredibly revolutionary when it was developed, I mean, people focus on the injustice of the fact that it was only for white men, but actually it was for white men with property. And the reason for that, in the context of that time period, was because if you didn't have some level of agency already in your life, you couldn't be trusted to make any decisions for the collective. And so as we've expanded the franchise more and more and more, the sort of people like miss that subtlety. They think it was just, oh, it's unfair. It's like, no, they were thinking, okay, we're decentralizing authority far more than usual. And America was also unique in the sense that every man was given the opportunity, because there was ample land and stuff. They could go out in the frontier, even break treaties, get out there on the frontier and make it. The Scots were great examples of that. Scots Irish, the Highlanders in upstate New York, etc. So anyway, I do think that we all are we're hit the limits of I'm not saying that we get rid of universal franchise or anything like that, but there certainly is, people are going to have to step up to a certain level, or that system is just not going to work. It doesn't matter whether we want it to continue to work or not. It's just not going to endure. Democracies that allow low agency people to make decisions will not survive in the current climate against authoritarian structures.
Yes. Well, the British had started along the right path to solving this, is different houses for different people with different levels of agency. So there is the house for the nobility, and then there's a house for the common man, and the house for those who are the propertied common man, and the house for the common man below that, the commons. And by having different houses, you allow different groups of people to represent their interests, and to make sure that they're, as part of a republic, is that the minority groups are protected, because they are able to, there's rule of law versus just democracy. That type of a system works very well. So, for example, if you want to vote on whether the country should go to war or not, or you want to vote on who gets to decide that, so we're gonna choose the president. If you're not funding that war or going to die in it, why should you have a vote?
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, what's going to be the requirement? And I think this should be solved in the private market. But what's the requirement going to be for public schools? Mm-hmm. Of course, mothers have a concern in that. They have children. But if you're a single woman with no kids, what business is it of yours? It has nothing to do with you. And so there would end up being houses for people with different requirements and different things that they're interested in, and they would use their influence to get things done. And some laws just wouldn't come up in front of certain houses because they don't have any effect on them.
Yeah.
Now, that plus part of the problem is the government used to deal with a very narrow range of things. Very, very rarely did the government enter into your life. And when that's the case, we don't need to fight over who does what and who's in charge. It doesn't matter.
Sure.
Because it doesn't matter. The president has no say in my private life or whatever. We've expanded government to the point where it's in every single aspect of our life. It's in how we raise our kids. The government is trying to tell us our most sacred duty of how to raise our children. It's between us, our spouse, and God. And they're trying to tell us what to do, how to raise them. Okay, so of course, all of a sudden, the pressure over who gets elected and who doesn't, and who's in charge and what the law says, is massive because it affects our future. Whereas 200 years ago, nobody cares who the president was, really. Right. Unless you're a landowner, you wouldn't care.
Right.
Because it didn't affect you, really.
So the last kind of question, because I know this has been really amazing, Noah. I know we're coming up on the end here. I really appreciate your time and going on with this stuff. This was fascinating. I just have one last question, and it jumps off of what we were talking about before with women and agency and how a lot of them have been promiscuous in the current era. One of the questions I get all the time from guys, almost to like a saturation point, is about women's end count and how you should factor that in. What is your perspective, practical perspective, given what we're looking at right now? Is a woman who's slept around, is that redeemable? And
yeah, I'm really happy that you asked me that question, because I've been holding back on saying what I think about this for a while. And I've just been basically saying, the statistics say. Mm-hmm. And if you look back, I don't give any opinion. Okay. And I'll give you some background here. When I got married, both my wife and I were virgins. So we were very conservative Christians, and so we didn't have sex before marriage. That being said, I know women with high end counts that they're married now and they're great wives. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I know women that were virgins when they got married and are horrible harpies that their husbands initiated the divorce. I mean, and if you understand the statistics, that's pretty rare. Most men will put up with terrible women when they shouldn't, but they'll put up with terrible. No, the husband had to initiate it. That's how bad it was. Okay. Here's the thing. It has less to do with end count than it does with her level of conscientiousness. Has she learned from her past mistakes? Has she learned that, I know women that their end count went up mostly while they were married because her husband was a swinger and got them into stuff, which afterwards, they afterwards said, God, I wish my husband hadn't done that. Mm-hmm. I wish he hadn't been involved. She was just trying to make her husband happy. And I know a bunch of cases like that. Mm. This is unfortunately a pretty common occurrence, apparently. There are women that, they were reacting from emotional childhood trauma. See, young men have emotional childhood trauma, and then they don't have sex till they're 35, and they go, well, I had no problem staying a virgin till I was 35. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, your problem would have been the reverse. Would have been hard to get laid, right? With women, it's different. If women don't actively protect themselves, they're going to get blasted constantly. They will get attention all the time. The question is has she learned from what she did, why it wasn't healthy for her? Has she changed her view of things? And does she respect masculinity? And does she respect loyalty? Okay, so you're going to ask yourself these questions because that's going to decide whether her past is going to be a problem. Is she the same woman, in other words? Or is she going to keep repeating that behavior after you're married? Or is she's learned from this and she has corrected her mistakes? She's corrected the thing that allowed her to act like that. There are a lot of women I know with a high count that they have fixed, they have done the healing necessary. On the other hand, I know guys that have never had sex, not done the healing necessary, and they couldn't be a husband.
Yeah, and I think it's something that a lot of guys miss with the whole end count thing for women is that they get so fixated on the fact that, well, if she slept with a guy who was, more attractive or whatever, that she's alpha widow, which is just total bullshit. I mean, that's just not at all true. Women use attractive guys all the time. She's scarce for intimacy, and if she wants to get laid, I'm not saying this is a good decision on her part, but it can be very emotionally detached. She's like, if I'm gonna get my rocks off for a night, I'm gonna pick the guy who's higher up the ladder, and they don't invest in them at all emotionally, and very often they don't even orgasm. They don't even come with them. It's just very much. They don't release any bonding hormones. I mean, we talked about this a little bit on the last interview with Adam Smith. So
yeah, those guys don't stick around afterwards to cuddle. They're out the door.
Yeah.
There's no bonding going on.
And very often the girl herself doesn't. The girl will be like, okay, get out. Some girls.
They're self-protection. They're protecting themselves.
Yeah, I've had this one client in particular. I mean, but I've heard similar stories before about this girl who. It's a big deal that he stayed over at her place because she's slept around, but she never would have a guy stay at her place. Almost no guy had ever been allowed to stay overnight. That's kind of her indication of intimacy. And so I think guys miss those metrics. I know I said one last question with that, but I was curious. You mentioned the swinger phenomenon. I think people, probably. So you see this as something that's grown a lot, and what are the outcomes of it that you've seen in marriages?
Yeah, I'll answer that just before. I want to say it's usually the guys with the lowest count that complain the most about the women with the highest count.
Yeah.
And again, almost all complaints people make are about self-interest and have nothing to do with the morality of the situation.
Yes.
They're just advocating their own interests. And they're advocating that women wait for them, basically.
It's
With the swing,
it's insecurity more than any kind of rational assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really come from completely rational place. Um, as far as the swinger thing go, yeah, it's disturbingly common. To the point where my wife and I have made friends with people, and one of the early questions are they wanted to make sure we weren't swingers because they're like, it's so hard to find friends that don't do that. I'm like, what? What? Uh, okay.
Yeah.
That's actually the first times I was hearing about it, and then as a coach, I've heard about this more and more and more. And this is why at this point I ask people what kind of relationship they're looking for, because I can't assume they want monogamy.
Mhm.
And I prefer to deal with traditional clients that want monogamy. I know how to construct that kind of relationship with people and help them through the process. And I know how to help them have relationships that aren't like that. But it is incredibly I've not seen a long-term marriage that's not monogamy.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've seen multiple wives, but those we were speaking about before. But I've not seen a marriage where swinging didn't lead to divorce eventually.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you think with this, but I mean, it seems like people get into that because they don't know how to go deeper within their own relationship and keep the intimacy and connection high. And so it's kind of
self-sabotage. It's
yeah.
self-sabotage, pure and simple. People are sabotaging their relationship. They are avoiding the true deep connections that they need to have with their partner so that satisfies their entire sexual and romantic needs.
Mm.
You shouldn't have to look outside your marriage for those things. You should be able to solve that in your marriage. But it's it's self-sabotage, and it is also what it is too is it's partly the pornification of modern people.
Sure.
And there's things that our grandparents would have probably found disgusting. It's like everyday occurrences today, and it's just a change of society, big change.
And do you think that some marriages are able to kind of integrate that behavior in there and not have it affect their connection, or do you think?
I think for a time, yes. However, so if you're both in your 20s, you're going to both be desirable.
Mhm.
And at that point, you're not really competing with each other for who's more desirable. Now you get into your 40s. Okay, if a woman looks after herself, she can be beautiful until her 60s, 70s, but most women don't. So at 40, the guy's still going to be able to be a swinger. The woman will be less and less interesting. Now she's going to be jealous.
Mhm.
Okay, that can go the other way too. At some point, someone's going to get jealous of the other person. Somebody, because you've normalized sex outside of marriage, somebody's going to have sex outside of the marriage, and they're going to get emotionally connected.
Right.
It's kind of like playing Russian roulette and going, I got 5 clicks and I'm still here.
Yeah.
Let me try this again. And at a certain point, you just keep rolling the dice. You're gonna end up in trouble.
Right.
And just like all promiscuous lifestyles, you are meeting some pretty horrible people, and at some point you end up. I mean, this is not as common, but I've talked to couples where, everything was fine until they met some violent person that, did some horrible thing that I don't want to talk about publicly, did something horrible to them. And now they got to deal with that because they're putting themselves in dangerous positions. It's kind of like men that are having sex with other random strangers. And they're like, well, I've been doing this for 10 years and I don't have AIDS yet. So give it time, and just because nothing bad has happened yet doesn't mean you're not on the road there.
Is your experience in observing this, is it usually the men who initiate this? And how does it, do the women usually, are they usually the ones that have the remorse about the situation?
It's whoever has more power in the relationship that initiates it. So if the man has more power because he's either a lot older or he's just a lot more dominant, then he'll be the one that initiates it. In cases where the woman is, the what do you call it, mummy wife ones that we mentioned earlier, then it's usually her that initiates it. And the reality is, like, I want to cheat, but I don't want the social repercussions of cheating. And that's really what she's doing. It's not exactly swinging, but he'll say that's what it is because it makes him feel better.
Right.
And then sometimes those guys, they'll go find a woman in this lifestyle that makes them feel like a man, which their wife isn't doing, and then that's why they leave her.
Yeah.
You know, it's just odd things that are happening. Like, you're really rolling the dice when you do that. Also, too, if you've got so many outlets for your sexual energy, why fix your relationship with your spouse when it has problems? You just go get what you need somewhere else.
Right. And that is, I think, one of the really understated stuff, is that rather than deal with the core problem, they think, oh, well, I'll just go in and explore more. And it's a way of leaning out. I mean, when guys look at porn, the same thing occurs, right?
Yeah.
But this has, I mean, I'm not defending porn, but this has even more structural risk because of the risk of bonding with somebody else in the whole thing. Like, it's harder to reverse the damage for this whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, Noah, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Fantastic.
I know you do coaching with guys, so just tell us a little bit about your services. I'm going to post all the stuff in the description
Yeah,
below.
so I coach about 2/3 men and about 1/3 women. I coach a lot of people that are in a marriage, and I help them with their relationships. So basically, it's your relationship to yourself. So that is, how do you deal with anxiety? How do you deal with the future? How do you manage your own life? And there's your relationship with other people. So it's sometimes that's parents and children. Basically, anyone who wants their relationships to be better can talk to me. Look up my name, noahrevoy.com, and you'll see my website there. And just contact me and talk to me. If you have any questions, we'll have a free half-hour session. I'll talk to you and figure out what it is you'd like to improve about your life, and figure out how we can work together.
Awesome. Like I said, those descriptions will be in the link. Those links will be in the description below. And we'll see you next time. Noah, thank you so much, and I'll see you on Twitter.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.